So another aspect of California, I'm sorry, of the United States going to war with Mexico is California. And the California Gold Rush in 1848, when James Marshall discovered gold in the American River. Uh, Another consequence of the Mexican defeat is that California started to become populated by miners and people rushing to get here, having gold fever. Between 1849 and 1852, more than 250,000 49ers, as the would-be miners were known, descended on the Golden State. Conditions in the gold fields in the cities. Well, to be honest, only a few of them struck it rich. It was a difficult lifestyle. Disease swept through little mining towns. Um, there were all kinds of new businesses that that improved and increased in number due to the sheer amount of people coming in. One of the groups coming in was Chinese folks. By 1851, 25,000 Chinese lived in California, and many Anglos were convinced that they were not fit to be citizens of the Golden State. And as early as 1852, opponents demanded a halt to Chinese immigration. This is also something that's definitely not part of this class, but something that should be stated is that even with all of this gold and the gold rush, white Californians tried everything they could to basically discriminate against other folks who happened to be there, including blacks and Hispanics and Chinese, by enacting what they called a foreign miners tax, which was just another example of discrimination. So this is what America looks like after we're all done conquering it. All of this stuff here, we have filled out our manifest destiny, so to speak, and now we have a contiguous United States, and it's not going to stop there with Alaska and Hawaii. How did reform efforts change after 1840? Well, you had a couple of different aspects to this. You had the pursuit of perfection with transcendentalists and utopians. Let's talk first about transcendentalists. These were a group of New England writers, such as Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry David Thoreau, believing that individuals should conform neither to the dictates of the materialistic world or to the dogma of formal religion. Instead, people should look within themselves for truth and guidance, which is kind of reflective of the American free labor ideal, looking to yourself. Utopian communities. A few reformers tried to change the world by organizing utopian communities as alternatives to prevailing social arrangements. This was something that happened as well in Europe, I should say. And these communities didn't last very long, I should say. Women's rights activists were out there. Women were involved in many reform activities that grew out of evangelical churches. Gave a few women activists practical experience in such political arts as speaking in public, running a meeting, drafting resolutions, and circulating petitions. So another example of how church and the experience of religion helps people learn how to be politically active. In 1848, in Seneca Falls, about 300 reformers led by Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott gathered there for the first National Women's Rights Convention in the United States. Calling for equal rights for women, they came up with something called the Seneca Falls Declaration of Sentiments, styled just like the Declaration of Independence. And if you were to read that document, you could totally see how it's almost the same language. Nearly 24 other women's rights conventions assembled before 1860, repeatedly calling for suffrage and an end to the discrimination against women. They sought fair pay and expanded employment opportunities for women. And this appealed to the free labor ideology. So women wanted equality, and this would be something that would be very difficult to achieve, and it wouldn't be until 1920 when they would finally get the opportunity to change the Constitution so that they could actually vote. There's a picture of Elizabeth Cady Stanton. How did reform efforts change after 1840 with abolitionists? Well, abolitionism became a huge political issue, especially in expansion. They continued in the 1840s and 1850s an opportunity to offer an unpopular ideal for many. Like, I'm not going to say a lot of people enjoyed having, they didn't not like slavery, but they didn't want it to spread. And I think abolitionists wanted simply to have people, they wanted slavery to not spread, and they appealed to that aspect of things. And that moved to the center of national politics in the 1850s. Black leaders such as Frederick Douglass, William Wells Brown, and others became impatient with white abolitionists' appeals to the consciousness of the white majority, and they wanted a little bit more radical political action to eliminate slavery altogether. Racial prejudice continued in the North, as you had 250,000 free blacks, which is about 2% of the population in 1860. There was tremendous racial prejudice, and a lot of people make the mistake when the Civil War happened that the South was all about slavery and the North was against it. The North was just as much racist as the South, but the good thing is that blacks organized to try to deal with that issue. The Underground Railroad was a way to get freedom for people coming from the South into the North, especially slaves. It was basically a network of churches, homes, and businesses that basically smuggled people across state lines. And we'll learn more about that in chapter 13. It's an abolitionist meeting. How was white freedom in the North and the West defined? Well, a couple things. Economic productivity. During the 1840s and 50s, a cluster of interrelated developments, steam power, railroads, and the growing mechanization of agriculture and manufacturing meant greater economic productivity, a burst of output from farms and factories, and prosperity for many. Acquisition of territory. The diplomacy and war handed the United States 1.2 million square miles and more than 1,000 miles of Pacific coastline. One prize of Manifest Destiny, which was California, almost immediately rewarded its new owners with tons of gold. Promoting the free labor ideal. Confirming the choice of many. To Westerners and Northerners, industrial evolution confirmed the choice they had made to eliminate slavery and promote free labor as the key to independence, equality, and prosperity. By 1860, more than half of the nation's free labor workforce still toiled for someone else. Free labor enthusiasts denied that the problems were inherent in the country's social and economic systems. Instead, they argued that most problems came from people themselves. Many reformers focused on self-control and discipline, on avoiding sin and alcohol. Other reformers focused on women's rights and slavery. And so, in sum, we have a tremendous change in the 1840s and 1850s with economic change, continental change, the acquisition of territory, and the free labor ideal. To what extent was it true that a person could make themselves something and make themselves something out of their own hard work and toil? What about African Americans? What about women? And all those questions will be answered, and I think are still being answered in our society today.